Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, online role-playing aficionado. With this video, I'll be reviewing the recently released tabletop encounter booklet, Prepared 2, a dozen one-shot adventures for 5th edition. Kobold Press has provided a review copy for the purposes of this review. Designed by John Swatsky and published by Kobold Press, Prepared 2 is the follow-up to last year's Prepared, a dozen adventures for 5th edition. Its premise, like last year's Prepared, is simple: to provide several encounters of varying level and style that any GM can slot into his or her campaign. Not only are the encounters more interesting this time around, the book contains some welcome new features, including role-playing notes and virtual tabletop-friendly maps to help successfully run these events in mini-dungeons. Now I'm going to briefly go over each of the 12 encounters, since you're here for the video review, before giving my overall final thoughts at the end. We can see here we've got the PDF here, and Kobold Press also provided a physical copy of Prepared 2, and it is a very nice glossy cover. You can see the image over here is a scene from one of the dungeon encounters. Very high quality. I was impressed. Very similar to a lot of their output. The other one I have is the Book of Layers, and I like the way it's organized and bound together and all that. So very nice physical version as well. So the first one we're looking at is Dibs, Wagon of Doom. Now these are in order of lowest level encounter to the highest level, and it features a level range from straight up level 1 to, I believe the final one is designed for at least level 11. About half of them are, I think, about 5th or 6th level or below. So it's a pretty wide range no matter where your characters are, and I'll kind of get into why that's a nice thing and also a tricky thing, because there is such a wide level range. So I don't know if you'll be able to see most of what they have to offer in any one particular campaign anytime soon. But let's go through them. Dibs, Wagon of Doom. You might recognize the name Dib from the first Prepared, who is the goblin wrestling fan and chieftain who is ousted from his last venture. So the first Prepared had an encounter that was essentially this big war machine that was like a miniature dungeon for level 1 or level 2 a party to venture inside. This time, Dib comes together with a war wagon, which is already rolled up in the middle of this town square, and only the adventurers can stop him. So what's nice is you could even be like just shopping or something and just have this encounter happen. And it basically ends up being like a low-level boss fight, which is just kind of funny. I appreciate the humor here. They can do wrestling moves on you, which kind of makes them a little crappier, which is nice, because I'm always really worried about level 1 D&D. They're so weak. But it's an easy-to-run encounter. It can take place in any town, and it's absurd enough to be enjoyable. It's fun. It's goblins, and goblins are very overused at low level. But also, what are you gonna do? Like, there's not much a low level party can handle. Next, we've got the Starry Breach. As soon as my PDF will catch up to us, there we go. This one is a little trickier to just plop in. So like the last one, you could literally put that in any town you wanted to. This one is obviously in a frozen wasteland, specifically at like an abandoned research outpost. So immediately I start thinking of like The Thing and these cool like isolated what's gone wrong incidents. This one kind of has shades of that. There's a single NPC professor who's kind of been researching essentially this rift between worlds. But really it boils down to there's just a single kind of tough enemy. It's a void dragon wormling. You see this really cool artwork for this creature here. And it basically just acts like another kind of challenging boss fight. The interesting thing is if you really roleplay that NPC really well, you can make that a very tense moment for your players. There's a fun bit where he will basically be affected by the dimensional portal there, and he will actually turn into, I believe, a specter to be controlled by the void dragon if you don't rescue him. So that's kind of a neat thing. But that could be a tricky one to slot in there. Like, oh, do you happen to be at a frozen wasteland anytime soon? But I like the concept. You'll see this a lot, by the way. This is a creature from Kobold Press's Tomb of Beasts. A very cool creature. However, if you don't have the Tomb of Beasts, then you just have to replace it. And there is a nice note section for each encounter. that lists in your campaign and what you can replace that creature with if you don't own the Tomb of Beasts, which in this case would be a white dragon wyrmling. So that information is good. However, obviously it's way more thematic and interesting to use this creature if you have access to it, and so I'll talk more about the Tomb of Beasts at the end. The next one for 3rd to 4th level PCs, the Ooze Tomb of the Oathbreaker. This may be my favorite encounter of the bunch. This is also the cover of Prepared. Look back there, you can see the tomb up there on the right side. This one is neat because it takes place just kind of near a lake. There is a NPC camp full of centaurs that kind of request your aid, but obviously you could just use whatever. And then there's a list of a whole bunch of bad shit happening that your PCs have to deal with, and I love that because it gives a lot of options for you, the DM, as well as letting you work through all these encounters to make it either more challenging or less challenging, depending on kind of where your players are specifically and what their power level is at. And obviously just having a lake anywhere is pretty easy to slot in. But essentially this tomb rises up where this, I believe it's just an adventurer, had something, she betrayed everyone and was turned into a mummy and sealed into the tomb, and now there's just ooze shit everywhere, including oozes falling from the sky, acid rain. There's just saber-toothed tigers in the grass that your party has to deal with. I just love all these events that can transpire and just to harry the party. Plus, the Oathbreaker, which is the adventurer turned mummy, could actually be a NPC that your party could work with. She could offer a quest, and even mentions like, hey, there's, they could straight up work with her if they want, or just turn into a big boss fight, kind of whatever you want. So this, I mean, it really checks like all the things I like in a quick encounter that I can slot in, which is, NPC allies, role-playing good and evil creatures, optional encounters, and a neat theme, which in this case is just the creeping decay and evil centering from a recently arisen bad zone of badness. So I really like that one, and a very simple one to slot in, I think. Also unique because I don't think it uses any creatures from the Tomb of Beasts, which most of them end up doing. Okay, it does use Grey Thirsters, but you could use Ghasts. That's not a big deal. Assault of the Steel Horde for 4th to 5th level PCs is almost too cool for a one-shot encounter. This one is amazing. Essentially, this giant drill contraption, you can see the map here, pops up out of the ground, and a bunch of armored soldiers, animated armor, are just milling about doing like or doing their combat maneuvers for this long-forgotten ancient war. Very much, I think there was literally a Twilight Zone episode about this, but it was like, I think it was like Japanese soldiers on World War II on an island or something, but this is a really neat concept, and it's so cool because, like, I know my players would be like, okay, well, what is up with this war? Like, where does this, if we follow this tunnel, where does that go? Can we learn more about this cool technology in here? Like, there's really cool shit happening in here. It's almost too interesting for a one-shot encounter, and it even mentions, like, hey, what's next? The story could conclude in a number of ways. What were these soldiers doing? Local powers may wish this power source. So if you're the kind of DM that really doesn't mind just taking something like a hook like this and then having your players completely go off on a tangent, this could be amazing. But I think for me, I'm specifically, with these kind of scenarios, I'm looking for kind of these one-shot, one-off encounters that I can slot in there, and that one may actually be too interesting. The Voidwalker is a neat idea. What level is this one? 5th to 6th. It's this giant behemoth monster, like Tarrasque size, is barreling towards a town, and so it kind of evokes like this Shadow of the Colossus, God of War. You have to like climb around this creature. The bummer is your goal is just to destroy the pilot, which is I think is a Darakul ghoul, which is like there's this army of Empire of Ghouls in the Midgard setting, which is Kobold Press's world. And the town where you get the quest, just okay, go to this portal in this hill. There's like 1 or 2 encounters there, and then you go through the portal, and you're already up there, and you just kind of fight your way to the pilot. Now, once you're up here, that's a really cool battlefield, and the map itself is really unique looking, obviously, and I believe the behemoth's like arm can be used as a kind of an environmental hazard. That's neat. I don't like the idea of just going to a portal and then appearing up on the creature. That part's really lame. I would have preferred this almost been like a really high level encounter, one of the later ones, and then used it to like and tasked your players with having to scale this monster while it was like trapsizing through the world, barreling towards this town. So a little disappointed that just kind of the portal is used to fly your way up there. Here, Hell Comes a Glittering for 5th to 6th level. This one is really neat because it's an investigative mystery story that can take place in any town. They follow a rash of murders, and it leads them to basically a very motivated and ambitious gem cutter. Gem cutting, who has made a deal with the devil, and that deal is to like kill people and turn their souls into gems, and then the devil eats their gems, I believe. And this is a cool one because it uses 2 interesting creatures from... Actually, I think one of them might be from the Monster Manual. The Gilded Devil? No, I think that's Tomb of Beasts. Gilded Devil and then the Crystalline Devils, which is really neat. Again, it's a pretty easy... And again, for an investigative thing, it's supposed to be very much just like one-off encounter, but it's... still, I like that. Like, you have to... boots to the ground, and you have to ask questions, investigate the murder site, and do all that, and then get the right answers. So I like this. Has a very definitive like beginning, middle, and end. Unlike, say, that Steel Walker or the Steel Drill one, which had like a bunch of open-ended questions about it. So this one I very much appreciate, and easy to slot, obviously, in literally any town, which is very useful for these kind of encounters. 5th to 6th level also is Neither by Sail Nor by Oar. This one takes place... It's a ship encounter, but honestly, it could be flavored for any location where your players are traveling. Your players are on a boat where they are also, unbeknownst to the players, the captain is transporting a statue, which is evil, turns out. And it's doing all kinds of terrible things. It's very horror-themed. It is making, like, algae appear all over the boat, or birds, like, dive bomb you. The crew just kind of stares ominously at the statue on the deck, and all this like really just creepy, fucked up role-playing shit happens, which is cool and sets the mood for one night when a bunch of cultists essentially raid the boat at night. And what's nice about that is it doesn't really rely on any specific monsters or even any specific location. Like the boat thing works because it's like that, no one can hear you scream, you're in a limited place, you can't really escape, so that part's cool. But you could flavor it where if you were like traveling over land with the, maybe in an inhospitable territory, and just have creepy shit happening like on a wagon or something. So I really like the way that's used as specifically like this can occur during travel, and just there's this evil artifact that's causing evilness, and then eventually attracts a horde of evil guys coming at you, and then you have to choose like, well, what do we do with this statue? And maybe the statue could be like a magical DM item or an item for your players. So I do like that one. Dark Night at the Odeum is very similar to the first Prepared's adventure, which was called A Bad Night for Betting, in that the PCs are attending a thing in town, and then a bad thing happens that causes a bunch of chaos, and then the players have to respond. I do like these kind of encounters because it forces the players to actually act as like people-saving heroes rather than just, dungeon delving, treasure gaining murder hobos. The weird thing is in this one, it shows off a specific monster, the Herald of Darkness from the Tomb of Beasts. If you don't have that monster, I think it loses a lot of its flavor. And B, all the people are immediately essentially incapacitated, and in fact they're turned into really creepy like environmental hazards, slashing people around them and whatnot as they kind of mutate, which is neat, but also you don't really... Nobody can like, well, I want to go save this or I want to do that, which is what I like. Instead, they just all have to fight the boss monster, which, it can be a cool, memorable boss fight. This one says it should be like in a fairy village or something, or an elf village. That's not necessary at all. You could honestly just plop this in any town, and I think a stage play is a neat opportunity for role-playing, but it basically just boils down to a single big encounter. The Tangled Temple is another one that I really enjoy. It's got a very clear beginning, middle, and end. It takes place in a jungle, so I may put this in our Chult campaign coming up, Tomb of Annihilation. I say coming up, although probably still 6 months away. There's a disease, a very virulent disease called mineral rot, aka grayscale from A Song of Ice and Fire, or Game of Thrones, which kind of hardens the skin, turns them into basically like zombie rock creatures. but also interestingly gives enemies new stats, including improving their AC and hit points, which I don't know if these CR values include that or not. It's not terribly clear. But anyway, you find an excavation camp that obviously something has gone wrong. Kind of similar to the Starry Breach one with the Void Dragon. They've opened this temple, and a number of the expedition people have succumbed to the disease. You have to fight them, and you make your way through the temple. There's a couple shambling mounds, and then you make it to the final room with a vine troll skeleton, which is a friggin' awesome monster from the Tomb of Beasts. So it does a really cool job of showing those off, although if you don't have the vine troll skeleton, it loses a lot of its flavoring. And again, unfortunately, you do not have the stat blocks for these creatures. You have to have Tomb of Beasts in order to use them, and there are like at least half a dozen that are featured. I would say at least half of the missions in here feature these monsters in really cool ways, where if you have the Tomb of Beasts, Prepared to is amazing usage of those monsters. But if you don't, you lose a lot of that cool flavor, to where these like layers are just built for them, which is really neat. So I do like this one, just a very simple dungeon crawl, but the disease aspect is very nice, and I like it very much. The Sparking Spire, as you can see, it provides one of the better looking maps of the bunch. Looks like kind of an underwater cavern. Reminds me of those old like gold box grid-based dungeons where you literally just walked along and they're like, oh, you're underwater now, but you're still just walking and all the walls are like blue and shit. That's what this map looks like. It actually takes place in this big spire, and it's basically just boils down to a blue dragon layer. I believe there's one encounter with drowned maidens in the pool, but otherwise this map is way huge for what it is. It just has the one blue dragon situated up here, and it is pumped up. It has a lot of extra things happening. The walls are charged with like electric coral, and it's got this pearl that can buff the dragon's ability. So it feels like a really cool layer for this creature, but ultimately it is just a blue dragon layer. So the dungeon actually looks more impressive than I think the encounters make it. But the nice thing about having a dungeon that's too big, you can always throw in your own encounters. That's, nothing stopping you there. Valley of Black Tears, 10th to 11th PCs. Obviously, we're getting into the very late stages here, so these dungeons are bigger and more difficult. This one, the journey's better than the destination, I think. There's a lot of cool things happening. There's Windy Valley. There's air elementals popping up at you. These gusts of wind can knock you around. There's a really cool bit where they make you go mad and you have to roll wisdom saving throws, or else PCs each PC must name their fear and describe how they might overcome it. Encourage the PCs to assist one another in overcoming their fears. That's amazing. Obviously you have to have the right kind of players for that to work well, but I really like that option. A similar thing was used, and that I did use for when I ran the House of Reeds and Whispers from the Book of Layers, and it had hey, your players are transported to this city, and just you have to role play your way out of it with a single dice roll. How do you do it? I like those kind of open-ended challenges. The actual dungeon, once you get here, there's a Spirit Naga and I think a pair of Gibbering Mouthers, and that's just kind of the encounter. You just make your way through here. Again, this is a big, kind of interesting looking dungeon, but ultimately it's just kind of a single boss layer for a creature. Now the reason for this creature being here is bizarre. It's like it knows when the end of the world is happening, and you get that from getting the Tomb of Understanding, which I believe is in the Dungeon Master's Guidebook. I think it ups your wisdom, which is fine. I don't know. I would probably do something a little more interesting with this final layer. Again, like the other one, you could insert your own encounters here, but I do like the way the wind can fuck with your party as they try to make their way through this valley. And I guess you could just kind of insert this cave anywhere there's a dangerous, hazardous place outside. But there's not a whole lot of story involved in it. A Shroud for Agantha has one of the bigger stories, and it is the final encounter for 11th level PCs and up. You meet this contingent of dwarves fighting hill giants. That's your first encounter outside, just basically anywhere. And you meet with Agantha, who is this dwarven leader who's very old, and she has prolonged her life by making a deal with a celestial being instead of a demon. But she needs I think her deal is about to expire, and so she needs this artifact. So it basically just boils down to a fetch quest. It does spend a good time detailing how to roleplay Agantha. A few of the NPCs get these nice little role-playing notes, which are appreciated. And then it's just kind of a straightforward fetch quest dungeon crawl. Aside from the hill giant fight, there's only 2 encounters in here. There's a bunch of ogres, I think, in the front room. And then when you fight them, some of them are supposed to design to like flee deeper into the dungeon, and then they get killed by the wraiths, and then the wraiths can raise them up, which is, that part's really neat. But as you can see, this dungeon is huge. The only encounters here are here where the ogres are, and then up at the top where you encounter the wraiths. So I don't know if I would put like at least some traps or something more interesting in here, just because, I mean, 11th level, like, damn. And you have to assume, I guess you don't have to, you can put them wherever you want, but to me, these encounters are one-offs, and I'm picturing the heroes being fully rested. So that makes everything kind of a stage easier than if they were like in the middle of a big dungeon. So to me, you could throw a lot more shit at your players, especially with this, you know, calling for an 11th level or higher. There is a neat thing that happens at the end of this one where a Skyne Witch, which is, again, another creature from the Tomb of Beasts, can appear and essentially give your players a choice. And this is very Shadowrun-esque, where it's like you have multiple factions to work for, and she appears and basically says, hey, don't give this artifact to back to the person you were meeting with. Instead, give it to me, and then I will bestow like a boon upon you. So that part's, although her boon is really weird. It's like, yeah, well, you'd have to look at the Tomb of Beasts, but it's like she foresees when the PC dies, and if the PC dies at that level and in that manner, then they get a free resurrection. That is bizarre and really tricky to keep track of and implement. But hey, it's something. Alright, so that's all of the encounters. The final section is nice. It gives a detailed appendix of a couple of the unique magic items. There are more magic items than this, but they're all found in the Dungeon Master's Guide. These are specifically the original crafted dungeon items. There's the shroud that you have to go fetch, and the one I just described, which is really creepy. Your players can wear it for some bonuses, but then they see this like hunched over old crone that points at them, and they have to roll like a saving throw or be afraid. That's really fantastic. So there's a lot of flavorful with extra abilities that aren't just like, you know, a +1 buckler. It's like it's a +1 buckler that can scare off intruders with a bit of a risk reward section, because if they actually hit you, then suddenly they gain advantage. So those are some neat magic items here. And then finally, it includes all of the player maps, which is very nice to have for someone like me who exclusively plays D&D online on sites like Roll20.net. So having these player maps ready to go, pretty much the #1 reason I'm going to use any of the encounters in any of these supplemental books is if I have maps ready to go. That's the biggest time saver for me. I guess, I mean, obviously having the written content is good there too, but like literally having nice maps that I can just throw in there and throw a few tokens on, and boom, we're ready to go. Yes, that's exactly what I want. And every single one of these has exactly that. It is a map ready to go, 5-foot square grids. Some of them even have multiples. You can see this is the Oathbreaker tomb, which has to scale differently, I believe. You can see there's the bigger one, and then once they get to the actual island with the tomb in the middle. But they all work really well. Unfortunately, these are all grid maps. There are no gridless ones. So that, and for somebody that's put a lot of maps into Roll20, it is very painful trying to line up grids into Roll20's grids. It's better than not having a map, but man, I would, best case scenario, give me a grid map and a gridless map, and then what I will do is put that gridless map into Roll20, and then I will use the grid map as a guide to line up where I need the grids to go. So please give me a gridless next time, but I do appreciate that all of these maps are here. They're all usable. They are ready to go, perfectly sectioned off. Wonderful. Okay, so kind of my final thoughts. My favorite part of the book, let's kind of go back a ways. Hopefully PDF doesn't freeze too long. Okay. Is the in your campaign side box here. I really love this. It's a very nice at a glance feature where it tells you exactly what you need to be able to slot this encounter in there. In this case, this adventure requires a small town and a small lake. It assumes the party encounters a traveling merchant as its particular story hook, and a journey through grasslands or plains with storms on the horizon is mentioned. That's fantastic. I love that. And then this one also says, hey, this requires you to decide a key story element. You could choose a god from your campaign, add a few details about a broken oath that this adventurer happened to break. So it just gives you a really nice, like, okay, here is the information you need at a glance to run this campaign if you're just flipping through here. And also the monsters that you use, specifically, do you need to replace any of these if you don't own Tomb of Beasts? That brings me to my next point, which I've mentioned throughout this review. If you own Tomb of Beasts, Prepared 2 is a great tool for showing off all these cool creatures that are there. And like half of them are specifically almost designed for just these cool unique layers to house these creatures, like the Void Dragon with the breach into the void, or that vine troll skeleton. Those are too many weird words together. In the temple with all the vines above it, where it can like jump in and out at people. Like those are, I mean, almost like video game boss fights with the layers just designed for the creature in mind. Those are fantastic. But if you don't have the Tomb of Beasts, then you just have to replace them with the best reasonable facsimile, and oftentimes they are just not nearly as cool. So unfortunately, it does suffer somewhat. I really wish they would have included the stat blocks here. You would have needed like maybe half a dozen. It would have made a few more pages longer. And so on the one hand, it's rewarding if you have Tomb of Beasts to be able to use these creatures in there. But on the other hand, if you don't, it's just not. A lot of the encounters just straight up are not as good without it. So unfortunately, I would almost go as far to say if you don't own Tomb of Beasts, I'm not sure I can fully recommend Prepared 2. It is really good, but like I said, using those specific creatures really brings out the flavoring of a lot of these encounters. Alright, so pros and cons real quick. Pros, you get 12 encounters offering a range of varied experiences from heavy role-playing to heavy combat. Most encounters feature fairly generic locations, which in this case is good because you want to be able to slot all these encounters into your particular campaign. That's kind of the whole point of the book. I really love the in-your campaign section of each encounter, which help give an overall impression of how the encounters work and what you'll need, as well as if you can replace any of the monsters. There's also an in Midgard section if you're specifically running your campaign in Kobold Press's Midgard that gives literally specific, like, okay, this can take place in this town, or this is the god that is used, and that kind of thing. I love the player maps that come with the digital version. All of them are fitted perfectly, 5-foot square grids to play with virtual tabletops. And almost every encounter effectively showcases many cool creatures from the Tomb of Beasts. Conversely, that is going to be on my con, where practically requires the Tomb of Beasts to get the most out of nearly all encounters. If you don't have Tomb of Beasts, that definitely becomes a con. And finally, I think the higher level dungeons feel a little emptier. There's just not quite as much content there, and the dungeons are larger, which is good, but they're not as detailed, they're not as full. So I feel like there's just maybe something missing there, or if they're just supposed to be a lot easier, because I feel like at that level, like, you have to really, your character has to be in the middle of a dungeon or be really challenged on some tough fights. Otherwise, they're just going to breeze their way through these encounters. My final verdict: Prepared 2 is superior to the first Prepared in every way, providing a plethora of even more enjoyable varied encounters to slot into your campaign. So thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com, and you can follow our own tabletop RPG adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.